The silence in the boardroom was about to be broken by the most unlikely voice imaginable. A billionaire's empire hung in the balance, while a 7-year-old girl held the key to everything. But no one imagined what would come next. Before we dive into this incredible story, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments if you've ever witnessed a child's extraordinary abilities. Your engagement means everything to me. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the crystal chandelier as Thomas Mitchell adjusted his platinum Patek Philippe watch. At 32, he commanded respect in every boardroom, from Manhattan to Tokyo. His steel-grey eyes scanned the final contract documents for the Henderson Industries acquisition, a deal worth $800 million that would cement his position as the youngest billionaire in tech investment history. "Gentlemen, we've reached the final numbers," Thomas announced, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had never failed. The executives around the table leaned forward, their expensive suits rustling against leather chairs. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 42nd floor office, Manhattan stretched endlessly below, a kingdom he was about to expand. His assistant knocked and entered discreetly. "Mr. Mitchell, lunch service is ready in the executive dining room." Thomas nodded without looking up from the spreadsheets. The calculations were complex. Merger valuations, tax implications, projected returns over 5 years, numbers that would make ordinary people's heads spin, but to Thomas, they were as simple as breathing. He had built his fortune on seeing patterns others missed, on finding the mathematical sweet spots that turned millions into billions. The executive dining room adjoined his office, separated by glass walls that could be made opaque with the touch of a button. As the executives filed in, chatting about market predictions and competitor analysis, Thomas noticed the new waitress for the first time. She was perhaps 28, with tired eyes that spoke of long hours and harder choices. Her name tag read Sarah, and despite her evident exhaustion, she moved with professional grace. What caught his attention more, however, was the small girl sitting quietly in the corner. Clearly, Sarah's daughter, brought along during what must have been a childcare emergency. The child appeared to be around 7, with curious dark eyes and an almost otherworldly stillness. While the adults discussed corporate strategies and financial projections, she sat with a coloring book, occasionally glancing up at the numbers being discussed with an intensity that seemed unusual for someone her age. "The Henderson projections show a 15% annual growth rate," declared Richard Goldman, Thomas's chief financial officer. "With our investment model, we're looking at a 32% return by year 3. Thomas spread the documents across the table, his mind already calculating contingencies and backup scenarios. The other executives, representing banks, law firms, and consulting groups, examined the papers with the hungry expressions of sharks sensing blood in the water. This wasn't just business, it was conquest. Sarah moved efficiently between the guests, refilling water glasses and serving the catered lunch. Thomas noticed how she occasionally glanced toward her daughter with a mixture of love and worry. Single mothers in service jobs. He'd seen it countless times. They struggled, sacrificed, and somehow made it work because they had no other choice. "The tax advantages alone make this irresistible," continued Marcus Chen, the lead attorney. "We're essentially looking at a legal framework that minimizes our obligations while maximizing profit margins." As the men discussed strategy, Thomas pulled out his tablet and began running final calculations. The numbers needed to be perfect. Investors would scrutinize every detail, looking for weaknesses or unrealistic projections. His fingers moved across the screen, inputting variables and adjusting formulas that had taken his team weeks to develop. It was then that he felt a gentle tug on his sleeve. He looked down to see Sarah's daughter standing beside his chair, her small hand barely reaching his elbow. She had approached so quietly that no one else had noticed. "Excuse me, mister," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the business discussions. "I think there's something wrong with your numbers." Thomas almost laughed. Here was a child, maybe 7 years old, claiming to spot errors in calculations that had been reviewed by teams of financial experts and mathematical specialists. The irony was delicious. "Is that so?" he said, his tone amused but not unkind. "And what makes you think that?" The little girl, he could see now that she had her mother's dark eyes but with an unusual intensity, pointed to a specific line on his tablet screen. "This part here, where you multiply the growth rate. You forgot to account for compound interest decay in the third variable." The room fell silent. Every conversation stopped as the executives turned to stare at the child who had just used terminology that most business school graduates would struggle with. Thomas felt his amusement fade into curiosity. "What did you say your name was?" "Lily," she replied simply. "Lily Chen." "Well, Lily Chen, these are very complicated numbers. I'm not sure you could understand." "May I?" She interrupted politely, reaching for the pen clipped to his tablet case. Against his better judgment, and certainly against protocol, Thomas handed her the pen and rotated the tablet so she could see it clearly. The other executives watched in fascination as this small child began writing numbers on a clean napkin with the focused intensity of a mathematics professor. Her hand moved quickly but precisely, writing formulas and calculations that made Thomas's eyes widen. She wasn't just copying numbers. She was rebuilding his entire calculation from scratch, identifying variables he had missed and correcting computational errors that his computer models had somehow overlooked. "See?" she said after 2 minutes of furious scribbling. "If you carry the remainder here and adjust for the inflation coefficient, your actual return rate should be 28.7%, not 32%. And this tax advantage calculation is wrong because you're using last year's rate structure instead of the new one that goes into effect next month." Thomas stared at the napkin, then at his tablet, then back at the napkin. He ran the numbers in his head, checking her work with the speed of someone who had made his fortune through mathematical precision. She was absolutely, completely, impossibly correct. Not only had she identified errors in his calculations, but she had also caught a legal oversight that could have cost him millions in unexpected tax obligations. The 7-year-old daughter of a waitress had just prevented him from making the biggest financial mistake of his career. How? The word escaped his lips before he could stop it. Lily looked up at him with those dark, serious eyes. "Numbers talk to me," she said simply. "They always have, especially since Daddy went away." The room remained frozen in stunned silence. Richard Goldman's mouth hung open. Marcus Chen had dropped his pen. Even Sarah had stopped moving, her face pale as she realized what her daughter had just done. Thomas felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that he was witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't a lucky guess or a parlor trick. This child possessed a mathematical intuition that bordered on the supernatural. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked, his voice softer now. "I don't know," Lily replied honestly. "The numbers just make sense, like they're trying to tell me something important." Thomas looked across the room at Sarah, who stood frozen by the serving cart, her hands trembling as she gripped a water pitcher. There was something in her expression, not just amazement at her daughter's abilities, but a deep, complicated sadness that spoke of loss and secrets. "We should get back to business," Richard interjected nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the disruption to their carefully planned presentation. But Thomas couldn't tear his attention away from the napkin covered in precise mathematical formulations. In his world of calculated risks and strategic investments, he had learned to recognize opportunity when it appeared. And something told him that Lily Chen represented an opportunity unlike anything he had ever encountered. "Actually," he said slowly, I think we need to postpone this meeting. The Henderson Industries executives filed out of the conference room with barely concealed confusion and frustration. An $800 million deal had just been delayed because of a 7-year-old's napkin calculations, and Thomas could practically hear them questioning his sanity during their elevator ride down 42 floors. But Thomas didn't care about their opinions. He was too busy staring at the napkin that had exposed flaws in months of professional analysis. "Sarah," he called, as the waitress began clearing the abandoned lunch plates. "Could you stay for a moment and bring Lily?" Sarah's hand shook as she set down the serving tray. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. I never should have brought her here. My babysitter cancelled last minute, and I couldn't afford to miss work." Lily apologized to the nice man for interrupting his important meeting. "Don't apologize," Thomas said quickly. "Your daughter just saved me from making a catastrophic error. I owe her a debt of gratitude." He gestured toward the leather chairs around a smaller conference table near the windows. "Please sit down, both of you." Sarah perched nervously on the edge of a chair, while Lily settled beside her with the composure of someone much older. The late afternoon sun streamed through the glass, casting golden light across the mahogany surfaces and giving the moment an almost surreal quality. "Lily," Thomas began, "where did you learn mathematics?" "My daddy taught me," she replied matter-of-factly. "He said numbers were like music, and if you listened carefully, you could hear the patterns." Thomas felt that strange shift in his chest again. "And where is your daddy now?" The light seemed to dim in Lily's eyes. "He died in a car accident when I was 4, but before that, he used to show me number games. He said I had a special gift." Sarah's jaw tightened, and Thomas caught a flash of something, anger, pain, across her features. "What kind of work did your father do?" Thomas pressed gently. "He was a professor," Lily said. "He studied very big numbers and wrote them on whiteboards that covered whole walls. Mommy has pictures." "A mathematics professor?" "Yes. At Columbia University. His name was Dr. David Chen." The name hit Thomas like a physical blow. Dr. David Chen, the brilliant mathematician who had co-developed the algorithmic trading model that became the foundation of Thomas's first major success. David Chen, his former business partner. David Chen, whose work had helped launch Mitchell Investments into the stratosphere of financial success. David Chen, who had died 3 years ago in a car accident that made the financial news because of his contributions to computational mathematics. Thomas's mind raced backward through time. He remembered David, brilliant, idealistic, always more interested in the pure mathematics than the profit margins. They had been partners in the early days, when Thomas was still learning to translate mathematical concepts into investment strategies. David's algorithms had been groundbreaking, revolutionary approaches to market prediction that seemed almost mystical in their accuracy. And then Thomas had bought him out. The memory came flooding back with uncomfortable clarity. David had needed money for his family. His wife was pregnant, and professor salaries weren't enough to cover the medical expenses of a complicated pregnancy. Thomas had offered to buy David's share of their fledgling company, promising to keep him on as a consultant while giving him the financial security he needed. But once Thomas owned the algorithms outright, he had done what successful businessmen do. He had maximized profit and minimized expenses. David's consulting contract had been quietly terminated after 6 months. The mathematical genius who had created the foundation of Thomas's empire had been cast aside once his usefulness ended. Thomas had told himself it was just business. David was too idealistic, too focused on theoretical applications rather than practical profit. The algorithms belonged to Mitchell Investments now, and Thomas had every legal right to use them as he saw fit. He had heard about David's death, of course, a late-night car accident on a rainy highway. The financial press had covered it briefly. noting the loss of a promising mathematician. Thomas had even sent flowers to the funeral, though he hadn't attended personally. Too busy with a merger in Tokyo, he had told himself. Now, looking at David's daughter, this extraordinary child who had inherited her father's mathematical genius, Thomas felt the weight of connections he had never considered. David's family hadn't just lost a husband and father. They had lost their primary breadwinner, their financial security, their future stability. While Thomas had used David's work to build a billion-dollar empire, David's widow had been forced to take a job serving lunch to corporate executives. "Your father," Thomas said carefully. "Dr. Chen was a remarkable mathematician." Lily's face brightened. "You knew my daddy?" The simple question cut through Thomas like a blade. "Yes," he admitted, "we worked together briefly." Sarah's expression sharpened with sudden attention. "You worked with David?" "It was several years ago. Before." Thomas trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Before I discarded him like yesterday's newspaper. Before I built my fortune on his work while he struggled to pay bills." "What kind of work?" Sarah's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. Thomas found himself in the uncomfortable position of explaining his history with a man whose family he was now facing across a conference table. "We developed trading algorithms together, mathematical models for investment prediction." "The algorithms that made you rich?" Sarah's question was quiet but loaded with implication. "Among other things, yes." Lily looked between her mother and Thomas with the intuitive awareness that children often possess when adults are discussing complicated truths. "Is that why you recognize my daddy's numbers? Because you worked together?" Thomas realized that Lily had unconsciously incorporated some of her father's mathematical approaches into her own calculations. The way she had restructured his formulas, the variables she had chosen to emphasize, they bore the unmistakable signature of David Chen's methodology. "Yes," he said simply, "your father was brilliant. And it appears you've inherited his gift." "More than his gift," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "David always said that Lily's mathematical intuition exceeded anything he had ever seen. He called her his little genius." Thomas studied the child, who sat so calmly beside her mother, seemingly unaware that she had just demonstrated abilities that most PhD mathematicians would envy. "Lily, do you enjoy working with numbers?" "I like solving problems," she replied, "especially when the problems are really hard and other people can't figure them out. Daddy used to give me puzzles that made grown-ups confused." "What kind of puzzles?" Lily's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Like figuring out patterns in prime numbers, or calculating how many ways you can arrange infinity, or solving equations that predict what will happen before it happens." Thomas felt his business instincts engaging alongside his growing personal interest. A child with this level of mathematical capability represented possibilities he was only beginning to imagine. But more than that, she represented a connection to David Chen that he had never expected to encounter. "Sarah," he said, turning to address the mother, "what are your plans for Lily's education?" Sarah's expression became guarded again. "We're managing. The public school has some advanced programs, but nothing that could challenge abilities like this. We make do with what we can afford." The simple statement carried volumes of information about financial limitations and constrained choices. Thomas realized that while he had been building his empire on David Chen's mathematical legacy, David's family had been struggling with the practical realities of life without their brilliant breadwinner. "I have a proposition," Thomas said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "What if Lily could work with some of the best mathematicians in the world? What if she had access to resources that could help develop her abilities?" Sarah's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What are you suggesting? You..." I'm suggesting that perhaps I owe your family more than flowers at a funeral. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade outside the windows, casting longer shadows across the conference room. In the distance, Manhattan's evening lights were starting to twinkle like mathematical variables waiting to be calculated. Lily looked up at Thomas with those serious dark eyes. "Are you going to help us?" The question carried an innocence that made Thomas's chest tighten, with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Guilt? Responsibility? Or something deeper? A recognition that this chance encounter might represent an opportunity for redemption he hadn't known he needed. "Yes," he said simply, "I think I am." The Mitchell Investments building hummed with late evening activity as Thomas dismissed his security detail and led Sarah and Lily to his private elevator. Most of the 42nd floor had emptied hours ago, leaving behind the soft glow of emergency lighting and the distant sound of cleaning crews working in other sections of the building. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, as the elevator climbed past Thomas's executive floor toward the restricted upper levels. "My private laboratory," Thomas replied. "I maintain a mathematics research facility for special projects." Sarah shot him a skeptical look. "You have a mathematics lab?" "Most people don't know about it. It's where I test new algorithmic approaches before implementing them in real markets." The elevator opened onto a floor that looked more like a university research center than a corporate office. Whiteboards covered entire walls, filled with complex equations and theoretical proofs. Multiple computer workstations displayed real-time data streams and mathematical models in constant motion. Lily's eyes widened as she took in the mathematical wonderland around her. "This looks like Daddy's office, but bigger." Thomas felt another uncomfortable tug of memory. David's Columbia University office had indeed looked similar. Cramped but brilliant, every surface covered with mathematical explorations and theoretical breakthroughs. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had recreated David's workspace on a grand scale, using the profits generated by David's own algorithms. "Would you like to try something?" Thomas asked, leading them to a workstation equipped with multiple monitors and high-powered computing systems. "I have a problem that my team has been working on for months without success." "What kind of problem?" Lily asked, settling into a chair that was clearly designed for adults, but somehow made her look even more determined. Thomas pulled up a complex financial model on the main screen, market prediction during periods of extreme volatility. "We're trying to develop algorithms that can maintain accuracy even when traditional economic indicators become unreliable." Sarah leaned forward to examine the screen. David worked on something like this before he died. He called it chaos mathematics, finding patterns in apparently random systems. "Exactly. But we've hit computational walls that our best programmers can't solve." Lily studied the scrolling data with the focused intensity Thomas had noticed in the conference room. Numbers, graphs, and statistical models flowed across multiple monitors, representing millions of data points and thousands of variables. "The problem is here," she said after several minutes, pointing to a specific algorithmic sequence. "You're trying to predict chaos by looking for order, but chaos has its own patterns. You have to think like the chaos." Thomas blinked. "Think like the chaos?" "Daddy taught me that numbers have personalities. Some numbers are shy and hide behind other numbers. Some numbers are bullies and try to make other numbers look wrong. And some numbers are chaos numbers. They look crazy, but they're actually following secret rules." She began typing on the keyboard with surprising speed, her small fingers navigating the complex interface as if she had been using it for years. Lines of code appeared on the screen, mathematical formulations that seemed to dance with life. "What is she doing?" Sarah whispered. Thomas watched in fascination as Lily restructured his team's entire approach to the problem. Instead of imposing order on chaotic data, she was embracing the chaos and finding hidden patterns within apparent randomness. "She's solving a problem that cost me $2 million in consulting fees," Thomas murmured. Within 30 minutes, Lily had identified 7 critical errors in the existing algorithm and proposed solutions that fundamentally changed how the system approached market volatility. Her modifications weren't just corrections, they were mathematical insights that opened entirely new approaches to financial prediction. "Test it," she said simply, leaning back in the chair. Thomas initiated a test sequence, running Lily's modified algorithm against historical market data from the 2008 financial crisis, the 2020 pandemic crash, and several other periods of extreme volatility. The results appeared almost immediately. Accuracy rates that had previously peaked at 67% now showed consistent performance above 90%. "This is impossible," Thomas breathed. "No," Lily corrected. "It's just math. Good math." Sarah stared at her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Lily, where did you learn to do this?" "Your father never taught you computer programming." "I didn't learn it. I just understand it. The computer language is like number language, only with more words." Thomas felt as if he were witnessing something that defied conventional understanding of human capability. This wasn't just mathematical genius, it was an intuitive connection to mathematical principles that seemed almost supernatural. "Lily," he said carefully, "have you ever shown these abilities to anyone else?" "Like who? Teachers? Other adults?" Lily shrugged. "Sometimes I help my teacher with math problems, but she tells me not to show off. And sometimes I fix mistakes in the smart kids' homework, but they get mad when I'm right." Thomas exchanged a look with Sarah. A child with this level of ability was probably struggling more than excelling in traditional educational environments. "What would you think," Thomas said slowly, "about working with people who understand numbers the way you do?" "You mean like Daddy?" "Like your daddy, yes. Mathematicians and scientists who could help you explore these abilities." Sarah's protective instincts flared immediately. "Lily isn't some kind of laboratory experiment." "No," Thomas agreed quickly, "but she is a child with extraordinary capabilities who deserves opportunities to develop them. Right now, she's working as a waitress's daughter in a corporate dining room. Tomorrow, she could be working with Nobel Prize-winning mathematicians. And what do you want in return?" Sarah's question carried the wariness of someone who had learned that nothing valuable comes without a price. Thomas considered his answer carefully. The honest response was complicated, a mixture of guilt over his treatment of David, genuine fascination with Lily's abilities, and business instincts that recognized the potential value of her mathematical genius. "I want to give her what I should have given her father," he said finally, "recognition, resources, the chance to develop her gifts without financial limitations. And in exchange, maybe she helps me solve problems that could benefit everyone. Maybe she develops algorithms that make markets more stable, or mathematical models that help predict and prevent financial crises." Lily looked up from the computer screen where she was still making adjustments to the algorithm. "Would I be helping people?" "Yes," Thomas said, "you'd be helping people." The simple answer seemed to satisfy her completely. "Okay then." Sarah wasn't convinced as easily. "This is happening too fast. We don't know you. We don't know what you really want." Thomas understood her caution, but he also recognized that opportunities like this didn't wait for careful consideration. "What if we start slowly? What if Lily spends a few hours here each week working with my research team? You could observe everything, maintain complete control over her schedule and activities. And school? Private tutoring with specialists who understand gifted children, mathematics professors, computer science experts, theoretical physicists, People who can challenge her intellectually while keeping her socially and emotionally healthy. Sarah looked at her daughter, who was now completely absorbed in optimizing the trading algorithm with the focused intensity of a professional researcher. "Lily, what do you think?" "I think Daddy would want me to use my gift to help people," Lily replied without looking up from the screen. "And I think this man knew Daddy, so maybe Daddy sent him to help us." The childlike logic was simple, but devastating in its emotional impact. Thomas felt the weight of implications he was only beginning to understand. David Chen's daughter had somehow found her way into his life, carrying both her father's mathematical genius and an opportunity for Thomas to address past wrongs. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly. "Something I need to tell you about David's accident." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. What about it? It wasn't really an accident. David had been struggling. After he lost his consulting work with your company, he had trouble finding other positions. No one seemed interested in his theoretical work. He was driving that night because he'd been drinking, because he was depressed about his career falling apart. The words hit Thomas like physical blows. David's death hadn't been a simple traffic accident. It had been the result of despair and professional failure. Failure that might have been prevented if Thomas had honored their partnership instead of discarding David once his usefulness ended. "I'm sorry," Thomas said, the words feeling completely inadequate. "Sorry doesn't bring back my husband," Sarah replied, "but maybe giving his daughter the opportunities he never had could mean something." Lily finally looked up from the computer. "Are you the man who made Daddy sad?" The question was asked with such innocent directness that Thomas felt his carefully constructed self-image crumble completely. "Yes," he admitted, "I think I am." "Then you should fix it," Lily said simply. "That's what you do with mistakes. You fix them." In the soft glow of the laboratory's evening lighting, with Manhattan spreading out 47 floors below, Thomas realized that he was being offered a chance at redemption by the daughter of the man he had failed. The mathematical genius sitting before him represented not just an opportunity for business success, but a path toward addressing the consequences of his past choices. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's fix it." The consequences of past betrayals were about to surface in ways Thomas never imagined. As Lily's mathematical genius began attracting attention from the most powerful minds in the world, dark secrets from her father's final days would emerge. But sometimes the greatest redemption comes from the smallest hands. 3 weeks after their first encounter, Thomas's world had transformed in ways he was still struggling to comprehend. Lily Chen had become a regular presence in his laboratory, spending afternoons working with problems that challenged MIT graduate students, while Sarah observed from a comfortable chair in the corner, grading papers from the night school courses she had quietly been taking. The financial media had begun noticing unusual performance improvements in Mitchell Investments' trading algorithms, though Thomas had been careful to keep Lily's involvement completely confidential. The last thing a 7-year-old needed was attention from reporters hungry for stories about child prodigies in corporate America. "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Rebecca Harrison called from across the laboratory. She was one of 3 mathematical specialists Thomas had hired specifically to work with Lily, a Harvard-trained cognitive scientist who specialized in exceptional mathematical abilities. "You need to see this." Thomas crossed the room to where Dr. Harrison stood before a wall-mounted display showing Lily's latest work. The child was solving theoretical problems in quantum mathematics that most professional physicists would find challenging. "She's not just calculating," Dr. Harrison explained quietly. "She's intuiting mathematical relationships that shouldn't be accessible to someone without graduate-level training in theoretical physics. Look at how she approached this quantum probability matrix. On the screen, Lily's work showed an elegant solution to a problem involving particle behavior prediction. But more than just reaching the correct answer, she had discovered a computational shortcut that eliminated 12 steps of traditional calculation. "Has she had any exposure to quantum mechanics?" Dr. Harrison asked. "Not that I know of." "Sarah, has Lily encountered quantum physics anywhere?" Sarah looked up from her papers. "David mentioned quantum mathematics sometimes, but only in passing. He said it was too advanced for a 4-year-old. Thomas felt that familiar chill of recognition. David Chen's theoretical work had included some exploration of quantum applications to financial modeling, revolutionary concepts that were years ahead of mainstream mathematical finance. "Lily," Thomas called gently, "can you tell Dr. Harrison how you solved that probability problem?" Lily didn't look up from her current calculation. "The particles want to dance in patterns. You just have to listen to their music and figure out which song they're singing." Dr. Harrison blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "She explains complex mathematics through metaphors," Sarah said with a smile. "David did the same thing. He used to say that mathematics was just another language for describing how the universe likes to organize itself." Thomas watched as Lily continued working, her small hand moving across the tablet with the confident strokes of someone who had never doubted her mathematical intuitions. In 3 weeks, she had revolutionized 2 of his trading algorithms, identified flaws in 3 separate investment models, and was now casually solving problems in theoretical physics. More importantly, she seemed genuinely happy. The serious, almost sad child he had first met was blossoming under the attention of brilliant adults who understood and celebrated her abilities. "Thomas," Sarah said quietly, approaching his workstation, "I need to discuss something with you privately." They stepped into his adjacent office while Dr. Harrison continued observing Lily's work. Through the glass wall, Thomas could see the child completely absorbed in her calculations, surrounded by whiteboards covered with equations that would confuse most college professors. "I received a call today," Sarah began, her expression troubled, "from Columbia University. They want to interview Lily for their gifted youth program." "That's wonderful news. They didn't call because of her recent work here. They called because they found David's old research notes, and apparently he had documented Lily's mathematical abilities from when she was very young. Notes I never knew existed." Thomas felt a familiar tightness in his chest. What kind of notes? Detailed observations about her cognitive development, mathematical reasoning patterns, even predictions about how her abilities might evolve. Sarah's voice carried a mixture of emotions, pride, confusion, and something that might have been anger. David believed Lily was what he called a mathematical savant, someone with intuitive access to mathematical principles that most people have to learn through years of study. "But you never knew he was documenting this?" "He mentioned that Lily was gifted, but I thought it was just proud father talk. I had no idea he was conducting systematic observations, or that he believed her abilities were so extraordinary." Thomas studied Sarah's expression and recognized the look of someone discovering that their reality was more complicated than they had understood. "What else did Columbia tell you?" "They want to study her." "Not just educate her, study her. They're talking about cognitive testing, brain imaging, longitudinal research projects." Sarah's protective instincts were clearly engaged. They seemed more interested in understanding how her mind works than in helping her develop as a person. The implications were troubling. Lily's abilities were attracting attention that could quickly become overwhelming for a 7-year-old child. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "They mentioned that David had been in contact with them shortly before his death. He was apparently trying to arrange some kind of research collaboration that would provide financial support for our family while protecting Lily from excessive academic pressure." Thomas felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with uncomfortable clarity. Financial support? A research fellowship. A research. Something that would have given David steady income while allowing him to work on theoretical projects and gradually introduce Lily to advanced mathematical concepts. The timeline was becoming painfully clear. David had been struggling financially after Thomas terminated their business relationship. He had been seeking academic opportunities that could provide family stability while nurturing his daughter's exceptional abilities. The Columbia opportunity might have solved all of David's problems, if he had lived long enough to pursue it. "Sarah," Thomas said carefully, "how much do you know about the business relationship between David and me?" Her expression sharpened. "I know you were partners. I know the partnership ended. I know David struggled to find other work after that." "It was more complicated than that." "How complicated?" Thomas walked to the window overlooking Manhattan, gathering his courage to explain decisions he had convinced himself were justified, but now recognized as morally questionable. "David created the mathematical foundation for everything I built. His algorithms, his analytical approaches, his theoretical insights, they became the core of Mitchell Investments' success." "And you compensated him fairly for that work?" "I compensated him legally." The distinction wasn't lost on Sarah. Legally, but not fairly. David needed money when his wife was pregnant with Lily. Medical expenses, family security. I offered to buy out his share of our company, promising to keep him on as a consultant. "But you didn't keep that promise." "I honored the consulting contract for 6 months. Then I terminated it when I decided the company needed to focus on practical applications rather than theoretical research." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "So you used his work to build your empire, then discarded him when he was no longer convenient." The blunt summary was accurate and devastating. "Yes. And while you became a billionaire using his mathematical insights, David struggled to find work because his most significant achievements were owned by your company. The legal documents were clear. I owned the intellectual property." "Legal and moral aren't the same thing, Thomas." Through the glass wall, they could see Lily working with Dr. Harrison, completely absorbed in a mathematical problem that would have challenged researchers at the world's top universities. Her inherited genius was the legacy of a man Thomas had used and abandoned. "I know," Thomas said quietly. "Do you?" "Because it seems like you've been treating Lily's abilities as another business opportunity, another chance to profit from the Chen family's mathematical gifts." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be uncomfortable. Thomas's initial interest in Lily had indeed been partly motivated by recognition of her potential value to his business. "That's not how it started." "But it's how it continued." Thomas turned from the window to face Sarah directly. "I can't change what I did to David, but I can try to ensure that Lily has opportunities he never got." Opportunities or obligations, because there's a difference between nurturing a child's gifts and exploiting them. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Harrison knocking on the office door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Lily has just done something remarkable." They returned to the laboratory, where Lily was standing before a whiteboard covered with equations and diagrams. Her mathematical work had evolved into something that looked more like artistic expression than calculation. "She's been working on this for the past hour," Dr. Harrison explained. "It appears to be a mathematical model for predicting emotional responses to financial market changes." Thomas studied the whiteboard with growing amazement. Lily had somehow integrated psychological principles, behavioral economics, and advanced statistical analysis into a unified model that could theoretically predict how investors would react to market volatility. "Lily," Sarah said gently, "where did this idea come from?" I was thinking about Daddy, Lily replied simply. About how sad he got when his numbers didn't work anymore. And I was wondering if there was a way to make numbers that could help people feel better instead of worse. The emotional sophistication underlying her mathematical work was staggering. At 7 years old, Lily was developing theoretical models that address not just financial prediction, but the human cost of economic instability. She's created a framework for ethical mathematical finance, Dr. Harrison whispered. Something that considers emotional and social impact alongside profit optimization. Thomas realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. Lily wasn't just inheriting her father's mathematical genius. She was evolving it into something more compassionate and socially conscious. This could revolutionize how financial institutions approach market responsibility, Thomas said. Or, Sarah said pointedly, it could make you even richer while everyone pretends to care about ethics. The challenge in her voice was clear. Thomas was being forced to choose between his business instincts and his growing understanding of moral obligation. Lily looked up from her whiteboard with those serious dark eyes. Mr. Thomas, are you going to use my numbers to help people or to get more money? The question cut through every rationalization and business justification Thomas might have constructed. A 7-year-old child was asking him to choose between profit and principle. I think, Thomas said slowly, it's time we talked about what your daddy would have wanted. The Columbia University Mathematics Department occupied a stately building that David Chen had once considered his academic home. Thomas walked beside Sarah and Lily through corridors lined with portraits of mathematical luminaries, heading toward a meeting that would change everything they thought they understood about David's final months. Dr. Patricia Vance, the department head, greeted them in her office with the serious demeanor of someone delivering important but complex news. She was perhaps 50, with silver hair and eyes that held the intensity of someone who had spent decades wrestling with abstract mathematical concepts. Thank you for coming, she began, gesturing toward chairs arranged around a conference table. What I'm about to share with you will be difficult, but I believe you deserve to understand David's final project. Thomas felt apprehension building in his chest. Sarah gripped Lily's hand as they settled into their chairs. As I mentioned on the phone, we discovered David's research notes while organizing archived materials, but they weren't just casual observations about Lily's abilities. Dr. Vance opened a thick folder filled with documents. David was conducting formal research into what he called intuitive mathematical cognition, specifically Lily's extraordinary capabilities. She spread several pages across the table. Thomas recognized David's precise handwriting, but the content was more systematic and detailed than anything he remembered from their business partnership. David believed that Lily represented a fundamental evolution in human mathematical reasoning, not just exceptional ability, but a qualitatively different way of processing mathematical relationships. Lily leaned forward to examine her father's notes, her small finger tracing equations and diagrams with recognition. Daddy wrote about me? He wrote about you extensively, dear. He documented your cognitive development from age 2 through age 4, identifying patterns that don't appear in conventional child development research. Sarah studied the documents with growing emotion. He never told me any of this was formal research. I suspect he was trying to protect your family from academic attention until he could establish proper research protocols. David was very concerned about the ethical implications of studying a child with such extraordinary abilities. Dr. Vance turned to a specific page filled with complex diagrams. This is where things become particularly significant. David wasn't just observing Lily's mathematical development, he was developing theoretical frameworks based on her cognitive patterns. Thomas examined the diagrams and felt a chill of recognition. These looked like the algorithmic structures David developed for our trading systems. Because they are the same structures, David was using insights from Lily's mathematical reasoning to create practical applications in financial analysis. The implications hit Thomas like a physical blow. You're saying that Lily's thought patterns were the foundation for the algorithms that built my company. More than that, David's notes indicate that he believed Lily's mathematical intuition could solve problems that traditional computational approaches couldn't handle. He was essentially using his daughter's cognitive gifts to revolutionize applied mathematics. Sarah's face had gone pale. David was using Lily for his research? Not using, Doctor. Vance corrected quickly. Observing and learning from. There's an important distinction. David never subjected Lily to formal testing or experimental procedures. He simply documented the mathematical insights she displayed naturally. But he was applying those insights to create commercial algorithms, Thomas said, the ethical implications becoming clear. Yes, and according to these notes, he planned to establish a trust fund for Lily, using proceeds from any commercial applications of research derived from her cognitive patterns. Thomas felt the ground shifting beneath his understanding of his relationship with David. He never mentioned any trust fund when we were negotiating our partnership agreements. Dr. Vance turned to another section of David's notes. Because you terminated the partnership before David could implement his plans. According to these documents, he intended to propose a modified business arrangement that would protect Lily's interests while continuing to develop practical applications of her mathematical insights. When was he planning to propose this? The week after his death. The timing was devastating. David had been preparing to address the ethical and financial implications of his research-derived algorithms at exactly the moment when despair over his professional failures drove him to drink and drive on a rainy highway. There's more, Dr. Vance continued. David had been in communication with several major universities about establishing a research institute focused on exceptional mathematical cognition. MIT, Stanford, and Columbia were all interested in providing funding and resources. Resources for what? Sarah asked. A comprehensive program that would nurture mathematically gifted children while studying their cognitive development to advance understanding of human mathematical potential. David envisioned it as a place where children like Lily could develop their abilities without being treated as experimental subjects. Thomas realized that David's vision would have solved every problem his family faced: financial security, appropriate educational opportunities for Lily, and meaningful research that could benefit other exceptional children. What happened to these plans after David died? Without David's leadership and expertise, the universities lost interest. The Research Institute proposal was abandoned. Lily had been listening with the focused attention she brought to complex mathematical problems. Daddy wanted to help other kids like me? Yes, sweetheart. Your father believed that understanding how your mind works could help many children who think about numbers the way you do. Thomas felt the weight of recognition settling over him. David's death hadn't just deprived his family of a husband and father, it had derailed a research program that could have transformed education for mathematically gifted children. Dr. Vance, Thomas said slowly, what would it take to revive David's Research Institute proposal? Substantial funding, institutional support, and leadership from someone with both mathematical expertise and educational vision. How substantial? Initial funding of approximately $50 million, with ongoing operational costs of $10 to $15 million annually. The numbers represented a significant but manageable investment for someone with Thomas's resources, and the institutional support. Columbia would be willing to partner if the right leadership and funding were available. Thomas looked at Sarah, who was studying her deceased husband's research notes with a mixture of grief and amazement. "Sarah, what do you think David would want us to do with this information?" "I think David would want Lily to have the opportunities he planned for her, but I also think he would want other children to benefit from what we've learned about exceptional mathematical development." Lily was drawing on a piece of paper while the adults discussed her future, but Thomas could see that she was actually creating mathematical diagrams related to their conversation. "What are you working on, Lily?" She held up her paper, which showed a complex flowchart. "I'm figuring out how many kids could get help if we used Daddy's ideas." Dr. Vance examined the diagram with professional interest. "This is a resource allocation model. She's calculating optimal distribution of educational resources across a population of mathematically gifted children. The answer is 473 kids in the first year," Lily announced. "But that's only if the grown-ups are smart about how they spend the money." Thomas felt something shift in his understanding of his obligations and opportunities. This wasn't just about making amends to David Chen's family. It was about using resources built on David's work to fulfill David's vision for helping exceptional children. "Dr. Vance," he said, "let's talk about reviving David's research institute." "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I think it's time to finish what David started." Sarah looked at Thomas with surprise and something that might have been hope. "You're talking about a massive commitment." "I'm talking about doing what I should have done 3 years ago, supporting David's work instead of exploiting it." Lily looked up from her mathematical diagram. "Does this mean other kids like me won't have to feel different and alone?" The simple question captured the essence of what David had been trying to achieve, not just advancing mathematical research, but creating a community where exceptional children could develop their gifts without isolation or exploitation. "Yes," Thomas said firmly, "that's exactly what it means." "Doctor." Vance leaned forward with the intensity of someone sensing a breakthrough. "If you're serious about this, we should discuss implementation immediately. There are dozens of children who could benefit from a program like David envisioned." "I'm serious, but I have conditions." "Such as?" Thomas looked directly at Sarah and Lily. "Sarah becomes the Institute's executive director. Lily becomes our first student, but also our guide for understanding how to nurture exceptional abilities without exploiting them. And every research insight we develop gets shared freely with educational institutions worldwide." "Whoa, you're talking about giving away potentially valuable intellectual property," Dr. Vance pointed out. "I'm talking about honoring the memory of a man whose intellectual property I've been profiting from for 3 years. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas, this is what David would have done if I hadn't destroyed his career." Lily stood up and walked over to Thomas, taking his hand with the simple directness that characterized all her interactions. "Thank you for fixing it," she said quietly. Looking down at the 7-year-old, whose mathematical genius had opened his eyes to possibilities he had never considered, Thomas realized that redemption sometimes comes through the smallest gestures from the most unexpected sources. "Thank you for showing me what needed to be fixed," he replied. 6 months later, the David Chen Institute for Exceptional Mathematical Development occupied an entire floor of a renovated building near Columbia University. Thomas stood in the central laboratory, watching Lily work with 12 other mathematically gifted children, ranging in age from 5 to 14. What had begun as an attempt to make amends had evolved into something far more significant, a revolution in how society approached and nurtured exceptional cognitive abilities. "The preliminary research results are extraordinary," Dr. Rebecca Harrison reported, joining Thomas at the observation window. "We're not just seeing individual development, we're witnessing emergence of collaborative mathematical insights that exceed what any of these children could achieve alone." "Through the glass," Thomas could see Lily explaining a complex probability concept to Marcus, a 9-year-old from the Bronx whose mathematical intuition rivaled graduate students, but who had been failing regular school because traditional teaching methods couldn't accommodate his cognitive style. It's like they're speaking a mathematical language that adults have to learn, but children can access naturally, Thomas observed. Exactly. And Lily appears to be what we're calling a mathematical translator. She can bridge between intuitive cognitive patterns and formal mathematical structures. Sarah approached from across the room, her transformation over the past 6 months as remarkable as any of the children's development. As executive director, she had discovered administrative and leadership abilities that complemented her protective maternal instincts, creating an institute culture that prioritized emotional well-being alongside intellectual development. "The Peterson family is here for their consultation," Sarah announced. Their daughter is 8, displaying mathematical abilities similar to what Lily showed at that age. Thomas nodded, but his attention remained focused on the children working together in the laboratory. What struck him most wasn't just their individual brilliance, but the way they supported and celebrated each other's insights. David's vision had created not just an educational program, but a community where exceptional abilities were normal and collaboration was natural. "Thomas," Sarah said quietly, "I need to tell you something." They stepped into the adjacent conference room, where portraits of famous mathematicians shared wall space with colorful artwork created by the Institute's students. "I've been reviewing David's research notes more carefully," Sarah began. "There's something I hadn't understood before." "What kind of something?" David's final entries, written in the weeks before his death. He wasn't just documenting Lily's abilities, he was documenting his own growing depression and despair about his professional situation. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. What did he write? He blamed himself for not being able to provide better opportunities for Lily. He felt like a failure as a father because he couldn't translate his mathematical genius into financial security for his family. The implications were devastating. David had died believing himself a failure, unaware that his work was generating massive profits for the company that had discarded him. "Sarah, I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover—" "I'm not telling you this to make you feel worse," Sarah interrupted. "I'm telling you because David's final entry in his research journal says something I think you need to understand." She handed him a photocopy of a handwritten page. David's familiar writing was shakier than usual, reflecting the emotional state that would lead to his fatal car accident days later. Thomas read aloud, "If something happens to me, I hope someone will understand that Lily's gifts aren't just mathematical, they're compassionate. She sees numbers as living things with feelings and intentions. Maybe that's what the world needs from mathematics, not just calculation, but empathy." The words hit Thomas with unexpected emotional force. David had recognized in his daughter not just exceptional ability, but a capacity for mathematical thinking that integrated analytical precision with human compassion. He knew, Thomas said quietly. Knew what? That Lily was developing something beyond traditional mathematical genius. Something that could change how we think about the relationship between numbers and human experience. Through the conference room window, they could see Lily working with a 6-year-old named Emma, who'd been struggling with confidence despite obvious mathematical talents. Lily was using colored blocks to demonstrate a complex geometric principle, but more importantly, she was encouraging Emma with the patient kindness of someone who understood what it felt like to be different. The Institute isn't just developing mathematical abilities, Thomas realized. It's developing mathematical empathy, which is what David hoped for all along. Thomas studied David's final journal entry, recognizing that he was holding the testament of a man who had died believing himself a failure, while unknowingly laying the foundation for revolutionary insights into human mathematical potential. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you." "What?" "The algorithms I built my fortune on, David's algorithms, they're being used by financial institutions worldwide now. The licensing agreements alone generate over $200 million annually." Sarah's expression sharpened. $200 million. From David's work? A doom from mathematical insights that originated with David's observations of Lily's cognitive patterns. The full scope of the ethical implications was finally clear. Thomas had built a billion-dollar empire using intellectual property derived from a 7-year-old's mathematical intuition, while the child and her family struggled with basic financial security. "All this time," Sarah said slowly, "Lily's mathematical gifts were generating enormous wealth that she never received." "Yes." "And David died thinking he had failed to provide for his family, while his work was creating fortunes for others." "Yes." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of the injustice. "What are you going to do about it?" Thomas had been asking himself the same question for months. "I'm going to establish a trust fund for Lily that reflects the true value of her family's contribution to my success. And I'm going to ensure that any future applications of research insights from the Institute benefit the children who make those insights possible." "How much money are we talking about?" "Initially, $500 million in Lily's trust fund, with ongoing royalty payments from algorithm licensing. But more importantly, I'm restructuring Mitchell Investments to prioritize ethical mathematical applications over pure profit maximization." The sum was staggering, life-changing not just for Lily, but potentially transformative for how society approached the relationship between exceptional cognitive abilities and economic opportunity. "Thomas, it's a fraction of what I owe. David's work didn't just help me build one company. It changed how an entire industry approaches mathematical modeling." Lily appeared in the conference room doorway, her small hand barely reaching the handle. "Mr. Thomas, Emma wants to show you something she figured out." Thomas looked down at the child whose mathematical genius had forced him to confront his own moral failures, and, in doing so, had opened pathways to redemption he never could have imagined. What did Emma figure out? She found a way to make math that helps people feel happy instead of scared about money. The simple statement captured everything David had hoped mathematical research could become, not just analytical tools for generating profit, but frameworks for creating human well-being. Thomas knelt down to meet Lily at eye level. "Lily, do you know how proud your daddy would be of you?" "I think he knows," she replied with the matter-of-fact certainty that characterized her approach to everything. "I talk to him sometimes when I'm working on really hard problems. He helps me remember that numbers want to help people, not hurt them." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her daughter's simple faith in her father's continued presence and guidance. "Come on," Lily said, taking Thomas's hand. "Emma's discovery is really important." As they walked back toward the laboratory, where 12 exceptional children were exploring mathematical concepts that could reshape human understanding of cognition and compassion, Thomas realized that redemption had come not through grand gestures or elaborate apologies, but through the daily choice to honor David Chen's vision by nurturing the gifts he had recognized in his daughter. The David Chen Institute had become more than an educational program. It was proof that mathematical genius, guided by empathy and supported by proper resources, could generate insights that benefited everyone. And at its heart was a 7-year-old girl whose father's spirit lived on in every equation she solved, with compassion, and every breakthrough she achieved through collaboration. Thomas had started this journey seeking to assuage his guilt over past failures. He was ending it with the understanding that some mistakes can only be redeemed by ensuring they never happen again, and that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths about what the world needs from its brightest minds. In the laboratory, Emma was explaining her mathematical model for emotional financial planning to a group of adults who were struggling to understand insights that came naturally to a 6-year-old. Lily stood beside her new friend, translating complex mathematical concepts into terms that grown-ups could comprehend. Watching them work together, Thomas finally understood what David Chen had seen in his daughter's mathematical abilities. Not just genius, but the potential for numbers to serve love rather than greed, to build community rather than individual wealth, and to create a world where exceptional gifts were nurtured for the benefit of all humanity. The little genius had saved more than Thomas's business deal that day in his conference room. She had saved his soul.